All right. Hello and welcome to those of you that are on already. Thank you so much for joining and for joining very promptly. Hey, Joe. We're going to give everybody a minute or two to log in. So bear with us a couple of minutes and then we will get started. For those of you that have just joined, thank you so much for joining and for getting on nice and promptly. We are just going to wait another minute or two for everybody else to get in, and then we will get started. So bear with us another minute or two before we kick off. All right, in the interest of time, it's 1 minute past. We're going to get started. We only have 30 minutes today, which gives us an incredible opportunity to jam it full of meaningful, impactful, and actionable content. So, welcome everybody to this episode of the Monthly Sync. This is all about what actually makes a good health score, and definitely a hot topic in the market right now. My name is Tash. I'm VP of Customer Growth at Hook, and I'm the host of today's webinar. And I'm joined by two incredible guests today. I'm joined by Charlotte and by Rav. Welcome both of you, and I'm going to ask you to do a little intro, tell the group a little bit about yourself and your exposure to health scores. Charlotte, would you mind going first?
No problem. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charlotte Copper, the VP of Customer Ops at One Advanced. We power the world of work through business-to-business software, so workflow software for all our different clients across 7 different sectors. We have a complex portfolio of products, so our health score has to account for that complexity.
Nice. And you've built a couple of, certainly had a say in building a couple of health scores during your time there, right?
Absolutely. I think it's one of those things that you continually refine. I know we're going to talk a little bit about where you get started, but I don't think anyone's ever got the final answer.
Nice. Love that. Thank you, Charlotte. And Rav, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Rav Dhaliwal, recovering CS executive. I think it's the best way to describe myself. I've been fortunate enough to lead CS teams at places like Slack, Zendesk, and Yammer, and now I work in the world of venture capital. And similar to Charlotte, I've had my hand in trying to create a number of health scores in a bunch of these companies that I've worked at.
Love it. All right. Well, the goal is to instill confidence today in the community, you guys. Like, we can nail this. We know what to do. We have just under 30 minutes together. Like I said, the aim is to keep this really, really punchy. If you do have questions as we go through, so for anybody that's watching, please pop them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try and save a couple of minutes at the end to be able to go through them. We're going to start off as we have done with the last webinar with just a little bit of fun. Wrong answers only. Rav, Charlotte, what makes a good health score?
Wrong answers only, huh? Okay, so a health score that tells me everything's green and has got a bunch of smiley emojis on it and everything looks fabulous. I'm not going to believe it, and I'm not going to be able to drive action from it.
Love that. Yeah, too much positivity. Yeah, Rav.
Wrong answer for me. It's a health score based on how good or bad the last conversation I had with the customer was.
Yeah, love that. Too sentiment driven, too much reliant on what the customer's telling you, not so much on some of the other data points that are at your disposal. All right, well, let's get started. I think like my perception as I think big picture about health scores is they've been around a while. They get a bad rap. CSMs, CS leaders don't trust them. And I'm interested, Rav, I know you spend time with a lot of different CS teams. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's an aspect of having a health score as psychological safety. Like we've applied some kind of discipline to deciding what we define as health. But I think health means different things to different people. even in your own business, it means different things to different people. I think that's one of the reasons why it gets a bad rap. I think the other thing is also you typically can only base their score on data that you can actually get access to, right? And data access is super hard in any kind of meaningful company. And I think that's maybe another reason why they get a bad rap. And I think also just how they may be being positioned internally, so away from the tech and the variables, it can sometimes set a misset expectation, especially with boards and leadership teams, that we have cracked the formula, and then when a churn happens, everybody starts to point fingers.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Charlotte?
Yeah, I think the trust comes down to people understanding what's behind it, rather than the health score is just a messenger. Being able to say an account's a 0 or an account's a 10 is meaningless unless the audience know what's being measured and why. And I think that becomes quite important. And to Rav's point, at different levels, we want to interpret that and respond to that in different ways. But it's don't shoot the messenger. It's just a score.
And I like actually what you said there, Charlotte, in terms of it's not like one polar extreme to the other. It's not the only thing you trust. Like obviously we're looking at other things too, and CSM's conversations come into a part of that. But at the other end of the spectrum, I don't think we can totally ignore the data and only go off of CSM sentiment or Rav, to your point, like the point of the last call. I think with all of the data that's at our disposal now, we would be silly as a CS team to not factor a health score into how we think about prioritizing or forecasting for renewals.
Yeah, I think your point, Charlotte's a really key one, is to position it as this is one in a number of data points that we look at, or a number of things. It's not the be all and end all of how we think about customers. Yeah, I think that's super key point.
So then in your opinion, both of you, what should a health score be? What should it do?
Okay, so I think what it should be is one thing, but then there's the reality of what can you do and where do you start. So I think you've got to think about the service level. So there's things you can measure that are easier to measure, which is about the service you're providing. And then there's also the element that's about how is the customer feeling. We hear about people putting CSATs or NPSs or things like that in there. So you've got to be able to distinguish between all these different aspects and which is more important to you. And a lot of the conferences recently have talked quite eloquently about ideal customer profile being part of that as well. So is the customer in the first place a good fit for the product and the value you're offering? So I think all three aspects become important in how you design and what you want to measure towards.
Yeah, I love that. Rav, what about you? Like what should a health score be?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my experience, because the word health is so subjective, I think having some kind of score that helps you as a team prioritize where you're going to spend your time and where you're going to apply your usually limited resources, because you never have enough resources. I think that's what a good score would be. So even if we don't use the word health, I think a good score is something where you go, well, okay, I'm not just going by whoever's shouting the loudest or whoever's got the renewal coming up. I've got some way to prioritize where I spend my time.
So you're seeing it, Rav, as a prioritization piece. Some people see it as just purely a way of looking at account health. Some people see it as a way of predicting likelihood to renew. What's your view on that, Charlotte, of those two there's three, I think, lenses, or do you have a different view?
I don't think they're actually that distinct if you get it right, because if you're looking at where you're going to prioritize your activity, you're going to try and repair things, improve things, and that elevation of better experience should make someone renew. So that I don't actually think they're quite as distinct as that, because it's almost like the leading activity to create a renewal rather than just measuring the risk of non-renewal. I think Rav's spot on when it's about prioritizing across what the score is telling you.
Yeah, I think my experience has been both from the scores that I've been involved in or used, or just a myriad of companies I get to talk to, is when people talk to me about it and I ask them how they're using it, it does boil down to some kind of, well, this is how we prioritize. They may not even use that word, but this is how we decide what to do when. I think if you're talking about revenue health or revenue predictability, I have yet to find an in-house built score that really does, can predict that, right? That is a data science, machine learning, AI problem on large data sets. Which is why I think even though people might talk about it in that way, their score is really ultimately helping them work out how to prioritize their time, and also as a way to just educate the board and the leadership about how you think about customers. So to Charlotte's point, hey, this is our score and this is what makes up our score and this is how we use it. I think that can be a really good way of speaking about the work you do internally, as opposed to we just do stuff and we do lots of stuff. Yeah.
And maybe it can be different things at a different phases of a customer's journey. Like you're not going to use it if a customer is 9 months out. Maybe you're not using it as a predictor of renewal 9 months out, but maybe you are using it as a way of prioritizing where you or where your team should spend their time and the customers that need focused.
Yeah.
Whereas as you get closer to a customer's renewal, then yeah, perhaps the account health is going to be a big factor in terms of your like propensity to renew or your likelihood to renew.
Yeah, and I think on that propensity to renew, I think one of the things we often don't realize is that we have a bunch of stakeholders that we're talking to, but the renewal involves quite a few people in what I like to call the renewal chain. And we may have no visibility or engagement with anyone else in the renewal chain, and sometimes we get nasty surprises. And so that's why I think talking about, well, we use this for prioritization rather than as a predictive tool for churn or renewal is a safer thing to do, because you may not always get the opportunity to speak to the economic buyer or the CFO, the people who are ultimately in this decision-making process, whereas everyone that you're working with is super happy and seeing value.
I think one of the points we bumped into in the prep really is how far out you want to look. So you were just saying in the customer journey. So it depends on the product. So some products you're going to decide to be renewing next month, 2 months out, 3 months out, and you're going to be wanting to look at the health score near that time. But other products you're going to be having a much longer lead time on the sales cycle there. So if your customer was going to go and buy that product from a competitor, they're actually going to be looking 18 months out, 2 years out. So you're going to be wanting to look at the health score back at that point.
Yeah.
I think you raise a really important point there, and I want everybody on the call today is there are variables that are contextual to your product, your offering, your buyer, your market, right? So if you're selling 5-year deals, your scoring mechanism is going to look a lot different to maybe a high volume SaaS product. If you have a very complex, long implementation that's services led versus, well, we just flick a switch and we help them configure it. You've got to take all of those factors into consideration, I think.
And I think it's really interesting what you talked about, Rav, in terms of your, did you call it your renewal chain? What did you call it with the different
there's a buying chain,
stakeholders?
and I always called it the renewal chain. Yeah.
Well, I think we've, we were talking before we came on air about the difference in the market right now, and renewals aren't a given anymore. You do have to run a renewal like you would run an opportunity, and the world is a little bit different. And so maybe there's an interesting thing there to think about in terms of like the health score perhaps could have been like always a predictor of renewal, but actually in this market, it's one of the factors that you think about as you think about your forecast and you think about where you may have risk come renewal.
Yeah, 100%.
So we've talked a little bit about, we've joked about what doesn't make a good health score. And then Charlotte, you've, I think, started to take us down that line of the types of data or the types of things that we should be including in a health score. And so I'm interested in both of your experience, what kinds of things should you be pulling in there? Data points, sentiment, we've talked about NPS. In your view, what are the components that make up a great health score?
I think it has to be things that you can respond to. So if the score is telling you it's low or high or mid ground, you have to know what you're going to do in response to that. So when you're deciding what to put in there, you're almost pre-thinking what you might do. And you're also thinking about, therefore, the boundaries for how you're going to measure those aspects. Because if everything, I know it was a joke, but if everything does end up green, where are you going to go and do things? Or conversely, frankly, if everything ends up red, that's no good. So when you're putting your data in there and deciding which elements you're going to track, you've got to set it up such that a reasonable percentage of things are going to fall into the place where you want to drive action. So for a real example, in one way we designed the score, we kind of had 10% falling in the bottom. And when we went and intervened in the designed way with those 10%, we found that 80% of them moved. We had positive impact, we moved them up to the better service level, and we can hope that creates a renewal, and we're still tracking that forward to know that because we've got the multi-year thing. But I think the things you put in, it's really important that you know what you're going to do in response to it telling you they're not good enough.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So you're less worried about, okay, well, what different types of components are going in there, but more worried about, well, whatever goes in there, it's got to be actionable. My team have to be able to do something with it.
Yes, otherwise it's just noise and it's diluting the score.
Yeah, I've got a score. What do I do with it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm.
Rav, what about you? Have you got a view on
Yeah.
components of a health score?
So I think I would always, and certainly my portfolio companies and companies I talk to, I always think if you're going to do something like this, I would be thinking about the score like a blood pressure reading, or I'm a middle-aged man, a cholesterol reading, two numbers, right? But they're related, but you should split them out, and broadly qualitative and quantitative, right? So I've got a quantitative view of the customer, login rates, usage, feature consumption, hard data. And then I have qualitative, like, how many execs came to the EBR? Do they come to the EBR? What's the sentiment of the customer? Do I have CSAT on their tickets, etc.? And I would always advocate the score is built up of two distinct things, one qualitative, one quantitative, because if you mash them together into some giant one big score, things can get easily masked. The score can look better than it actually is. So, hey, the sentiment score is super high. The CSM is saying that they love talking to us and they've given us loads of stories of the value, but the product usage is not doing so well. Or what's really burnt me personally, vice versa. They're doing great with the product. Look at it. Daily active usage, up, integrations, up. But they don't talk to us very much. Or when they log tickets, they don't seem to be happy. We got a combined score, and then the usage is just masking out that there is another problem that we are not addressing. So I would say always think of it like a blood pressure reading or a cholesterol reading, qualitative and quantitative.
I think it's a really interesting concept because I think that that might be some of the reason that health scores get a bad rap, because you get this just one singular view and you maybe don't get the next layer down, which could be in your example, Rav, well, what's the sentiment versus what's the like the harder, more structured product data here, and which one is overlaying. But it could also be maybe in your world, Charlotte, well, the account as a whole is green, but this product over here is red, or this team over here is red. And actually that creates a crack in your whole renewal that opens up a whole world of risk.
And that team could be super influential in decisions, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I really liked what you said, Charlotte, about like, okay, it can't all be green. I think this is a common misconception that you're always going to have red accounts in your book of business. Like a good health score, like you said, has a mix. And it's okay. Yes, we're always going to want to turn them all to green. But if you get to a point where everything's green, but maybe your churn number isn't matching, then something has kind of gone wrong along the way, right?
Well, it kind of goes back to a little bit of getting caught out where, if you have this qualitative element, and I have seen this in some teams where the CS have a quarterly target on their book of business for the health score rating. And so people start bumping up the sentiment because they can do it themselves. Oh, they seem really happy. And that's pushing me more in from the yellows into the greens. And then next quarter it'll go down again, right? And so that's not giving you an accurate reflection, right?
And I think this is where we have to remember in CS that the point is not to game the system. The point is not to check the box and be like, hey, look, I got my customer to green. Like the point is that these health scores are there to help you, to give you guidance and to give you pointers in terms of like, hey, there might be something over there that you haven't figured out yet. You should maybe go look at that. And that everything is there to help you versus a way of checking a box or rating your performance necessarily.
I mean, I think the simple guidance I used to give my team is, hey, churn happens, it's a fact of life, but unexpected churn is not acceptable.
Yeah, totally. And
Probably
Charlotte,
lead really nicely to as a customer success team, we're going to layer in and engage with our customers for a low score, but actually we have to educate the business around us, because often it's not telling us the problem is something customer success can fix. Often it's telling us the implementation needs some more addressing, or perhaps the product needs some extra feature in a particular type of space. So
yes,
to really be able to know what the score is telling us so we can go and educate the teams around us and influence them. The customer success is a touch point with the customer that's really powerful, and should be bringing that insight back.
It's a really interesting point you make there, Charlotte, because I've seen some companies do this where they actually CSAT at the close of the deal to see how happy the customer was with the sale process.
Okay.
Right? And the reason being for that is sometimes, you'll get handed an account and the buyer is really unhappy because they got strong-armed on the price and there was not enough negotiation. And that's not reflected in the actual score that the team is using, because their metrics are all, decent. So that's another thing that's worth thinking about, is that, health really actually starts in the sales cycle, not actually just from the point that gets handed to the success team.
That's fair.
Love that. All right. Well, I think we've started to talk a little bit about what makes a great score? How do you know you've got a great score? So Charlotte, you've talked about like actionability. Rav, you've talked about like visibility almost, like actually just this one view without being able to go layer deeper and seeing where that is maybe isn't the most indicative. Is there anything else we've missed? Like how else would you know you've ended up with a decent score that you can trust, that you can value your business around?
I think it comes back a little bit to the example I mentioned before. So when you go and do something in relation to the score, what does that make happen? So we've talked a lot about going in at the low end of the score and perhaps repairing something or trying to improve something. You can think about the other end of the score scale as well. So the customers that are scoring well and seem engaged and love your product and interface with your team really well. Well, how do we get stories and engagement from these people for our advocacy? How do we make these people feel as valued as they really are, because they they're invested in our product? And I think it's very easy to talk about health scores always in the low end of the scale, but actually you don't want to forget the people in the middle, because they're going to be a solid base for your product, and you certainly don't want to forget the people at the top. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah, I love that. It's a really nice reminder.
Yeah, I'm going to have a slightly, it's not contrarian, but I'm going to have a slightly more cynical view, which is I don't think you should ever be happy with your health score, and you should always be paranoid about it. Because even if you're getting good correlation to say, well, I've got enough data now, I've got 2 years worth of data, and I can get some correlative patterns between people who have these kinds of scores and the financial outcome that we want with them, how much they're expanding, not expanding. You should still be paranoid about the fact that, are these variables still the right ones? Has our product changed significantly? Do we need to keep iterating on the score? And I just mentioned that because I'd have seen a lot of people set, some metrics to kind of be their score for prioritization or health very early, and then not really revisit it again, not realizing that our ICP's evolved, our product really evolved, the kind of people we're selling to has really evolved, and we have stuck
The
with it.
market's
So,
changed. Yeah.
So I think, it's a long way of saying it may be delivering good, consistent results. You may have good confidence in it, but just be paranoid.
Always be paranoid.
Yeah.
As you were saying that, I was going to say, this
True.
is customer success in general, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just always be iterating.
Just
And
be
then you landed
paranoid
with
and
always be
always assume
paranoid. I
the
was like,
competition is in your account, even if they're not. That's it, yeah.
I love that. Okay, so good health score, actionable, gives you the detail, and really you should be iterating on it fairly regularly, not too often in the case that you never get a good benchmark to see how well you're doing.
Yeah.
But you've got to know that as your market changes, your product changes, your ICP changes, that your health score is still reflective. I love that.
Actually, I've got a question for Charlotte. So on the ops side of your team, do you guys like review the scoring data every quarter in relation to the renewals, or do you try to get correlative data?
Yeah, we tried to do that, although we've had a couple of resets, so we're watching it travel through right now.
Gotcha, right.
Point, if you change it too often, it's very hard to keep that.
For sure, yeah. You need to let it run for a period. Yeah.
But yes, we did. Yeah, we did a bit of mathematical exercise to set the current health score running, and now we're watching that one run through. I think we know that when we did the reset, it had a different weighting on different focus. It brought different customers into the let's go look at customers space, and we do know that the action we performed on those customers, which whether that be support team, customer success team, or actually finance team, because some of ours was around the billing aspect, if we go and address that, then do they track through? Do they have a longer lifetime value? Do they stay with us for longer? We have to have a longer period of time to monitor that, but it is looking positive right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because I think to your earlier question, Tash, about what makes a good health score, I think that's a key thing, is operationally that you are letting it run for a decent period, and you are then analyzing it to see if it needs adjusting, or analyzing it to see if the financial results correlate with the scores, I think. Yeah.
Always be paranoid.
We'll
get you that on a t-shirt, Rav. I'm going to ask you guys one more question. So I'm going to just say to anybody watching, if you want to ask questions, now's your time to get it in the Q&A, so that we can take a couple of questions at the end. Jeffrey, I know you've popped a couple of things in there. So I'm not sure if you have any questions off the back of your comments, but I think final thing then, maybe here to bring us home. Let's say any of the folks listening maybe don't have a health score, or aren't quite sure how accurate their health score is. Is it made up in the right way? If it were the two of you and you were starting again, what guidance would you give people on where do you start, or what kinds of questions should you go and ask internally to figure out if you can trust the score that you've got?
I think, Charlie, you're probably closer to the day-to-day than I am, so after you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if I was starting from scratch, I would probably start with why are we losing customers, or why do we think we're losing customers? Because it's not like we have no idea if we don't have a score. We have exit interviews, or people have told us that they didn't like whatever, or they went to whatever competitor. So you kind of have this beginning of an understanding of why people might leave. I would probably go and look for a data source around that. So if people were leaving because they didn't like a particular, they thought, I don't know, a piece of the product wasn't right, I would probably go and start looking at, can I record how that piece of the product's being used? Perhaps then when we have something called Pendo, I'm sure there's lots of varieties out there, but whatever it is you're using to measure product adoption. Whereas if people were leaving because of service, I might start thinking about support SLAs. But I'd start there. I'd start at, why do I think people are leaving, and what data sources do I have around that? And I'd start trying to build patterns and tolerances. And then, as you said, I'd iterate. I'd want to put more and more things in the score. If I really was starting from scratch, I think I'd go at, why do I think people are leaving, and how can I measure that aspect?
I think just in terms of, if I was just getting started from scratch, I would be trying to enumerate all the data sources I think I need and what I actually have access to. Then I would probably split those into, these are quantitative ones, these are qualitative ones. My blood pressure reading. And then I would probably just start version 1 on an equal weighting for every variable, put that in the field and see how that runs, and then start adjusting it after maybe a quarter or two.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect, so once whatever you've decided this score's going to be as its first iteration, already have a comms plan going. It's really important that the customer success team understand what the score's telling them, and the wider business. And then as you iterate, you refresh that comms plan all the time, so that everyone knows what they're looking at. Because just looking at a shiny number 10 or a scary number 2 isn't really going to take you anywhere if no one knows how to interpret it.
Yeah, I love that.
One funny anecdote I wanted to share. I worked for a very, very good CEO, and I said, we want to do this health score. This is how we're thinking about it. And he looked at me and went, "This is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Why do you want to do this? This is an utter waste of time. Go away." So I went away, and then a few months later, I came back with exactly the same thing, but I'd called it a propensity score. I said, "We want to do this propensity score thing because it's the propensity for them to be successful in the future." He goes, "Great, love it. Go on. I'll go off and do it."
So sometimes branding
Branding.
is everything.
Branding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
branding is
Yeah.
everything. All right, thank you both so much. We'll take a couple of questions before we wrap up. Jeffrey, I think yours is more of a comment than a question, and I have to say I totally agree. Like, health scores need to become a lot more predictive. They need history, as well as understanding like why they've moved the way that they've moved. And so, Jeffrey, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but I totally agree. Stuart has a question. Rav, you talked about unexpected churn being unacceptable. What's a good process to review where expectation doesn't meet reality? So expectation being green score and reality is customer churn.
Oh, right. Okay. So, and I think as a team, you want to be giving the team very clear criteria for what a risk is, and then that kicks off a process. And, I've worked at companies where every week or every 2 weeks, we've sat down and looked at all of those ones as a team and then discussed what it is that we are going to do and what's the criteria for getting this particular customer out of risk. And then I think every quarter you want to do a wash up on, these scores weren't flashing red, but we lost them, right? And then you want to make sure that you're determining why you lost them. Oh, it was pricing. Okay, well, we couldn't have trapped that in our, in our score. Or actually, they went to a competitor because they had these other features, even though we have them and they didn't know about them. So I think you want to have a weekly, fortnightly cadence for looking at risk, and a quarterly wash up on scores versus actual churn.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm not sure if this is quite the same thing, but certainly when I do my forecast, because your forecast that your team put in should encapsulate the health score, but should also encapsulate the sentiment and the things that they've been speaking to customers about. And so I'm always looking at, well, where have I got discrepancies between the forecast and the health score, where my team are calling something at renewing, but the health score is red, or where my team are calling something at low, but the health score is green, and trying to figure out like where we're getting most discrepancies and the why. And then second question from Stuart. So related to that, sometimes we're surprised beyond our control. Customers tell us everything is fine, but then they're working with a competitor, naughty customers. How do you differentiate a bad assessment versus a good assessment, where maybe all the right questions were asked by CSM, but the customer still churned?
Interesting.
I think the loss interviews are really important, and engaging with the exiting customers if you possibly can. So some of the things that take us by surprise would be even possibly outside the customer's own control. So their company merges with another company, or they're insolvent, even that sort of stuff. And that doesn't mean our score's wrong. It means the market or the customer changed situation. And almost when you start all this data analysis piece that Rav's described, you almost have to bucket those ones off. It was nothing to do with the score being wrong.
Out of our control.
The whole customer or the whole market moved, and you have to be realistic about that.
Yeah.
And if I understand the question, correct me if I'm wrong, Stuart, it's about the unexpected churn, even though I would say what I would be wanting to do as a CS leader is to understand from the CSM, well, who were you speaking to? Where were they on the renewal chain? Were you only stuck down here, or did you actually talk to an economic buyer or the CFO or etc.? Because I think it may well have been unexpected because we simply weren't engaging at the right levels and asking the right questions. We may have done discovery too low down with people who were genuinely happy.
But I think also, Rab, like some of your unexpected churn might be like, hey, CSM, you don't want to get caught out where your customer churns and the health score said it was red, but you were like, no, they're happy. It's like that level of unexpected churn
For sure,
that just isn't acceptable.
That's happy is.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. All right. One last question in the last 30 seconds. More for you, Rav. In the VC world, have you seen funds use health scores or equivalents to track the strength of their relationships or engagements with LPs?
What a great question. No, I have not. And that's because the LPs vary so much. But what you do is you do have a very good lagging indicators. When you go out to fundraise again, you'll see who originally invested if they want to give you more money. That's normally the health score that we look at.
Yes. I love that. Well, not too dissimilar to customers, right?
It's exactly the same business.
More?
It's just cash, not software. That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Charlotte, Rav, you two have been an absolute joy. Loads of really great content, lots of actionable tips in there. Thank you so much, both of you. And thanks to everybody that listened. Please follow us on LinkedIn. Please look out for the next episode in a month's time. And thank you so much for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you later.
Thanks, Tash.